I want to start really with Paul. And my question to you is, what comes to your mind when you hear Agile metrics? So is there any association that you're having with that, or what is it that's really kind of, yeah, what kind of bell rings that to you? It could be like different kinds of metrics you are having in mind, or burn rate is one metric, definitely. What else? You can have several things that you want to share. Here we have just one person who shared, but maybe there are more who have an idea about that. Well, the backlog is something we can take a look at for sure. What else? If you hear Agile metrics, what do you think? Sizing. Sometimes people say even right sizing, whatever right means. But definitely, yeah, which probably is related to backlog burn rate, the sizing. Actually, you don't have to have experience with Agile. Then a product manager probably has the biggest interest in really Agile metrics for various reasons. A steering team, similarly as the product manager. Enterprise dashboard, yeah, so we know what's going on and if we are performing well and if we are really having more effectiveness here. Let's see, self-governing team. That's definitely a very Agile term here. Definitely. Fred, thank you for putting the parking lot items in it. Thanks. And maybe wait a tiny little bit more. What else comes to your mind? So far, nothing is really standing out. That's interesting. So you all have various ideas about what it is, which is absolutely fine. And this is kind of what we are having right now as whatever your associations with Agile metrics. Velocity. Oh, that was missing, definitely. Yeah, can see that. And I want to move on. You can still bring them in. We will have them on the slides, so this is good. And want to jump into the session here. Well, we are already in the session, of course. So my little agenda is I first want to talk about metrics. That's why we also started with the metrics and what triggers that for you. What are you associating with it? And then I want to move on to increasing effectiveness. So let's see where we are here. So the first thing you have to be aware of when we are talking about any kinds of metrics, metrics means that we make something transparent. So no matter what you are measuring here, in this case, probably more something like the productivity, but we want to make it transparent so we can see and also can compare if things have changed over time or not. And if you think of it, what you really right away should probably avoid is that from a management point of view or leadership point of view, that with the metrics you are using, referring to objectives where the purpose has never been described. And I guess most of us have seen and experienced that sometimes somebody else sets an objective for us. And of course, this is not ours. We don't have a buy-in here. And therefore, what we often do is just we try to fulfill that objective, fulfill the metric, but not necessarily the objective because we don't have the buy-in there. However, the most difficult thing, if we talk about measuring something, somebody, some team, some work, is that, well, if transparency comes without trust, and remember we just said that transparency is the thing that happens when we talk about metrics, because we make whatever happens transparent with the metric. And if this comes without trust, then everyone feels that this is about control. And it's not about, I don't know, like getting better, learning from each other, being more productive together. It's really way more about somebody else is controlling somebody else. And so that's why I already said, like, the objectives have to be cleared. And the objectives at best are some that the team has defined for themselves. So if we just measure for control or are getting measured without knowing what it's for, then actually the whole metrics are waste, because nobody will live up to them. We would just try to fulfill whatever is expected. So transparency has to be based on trust. This is one thing. Now I want to look into one of the metrics that came at one of the last things when I asked you what you're associating with it, and which was a surprise that it came so last, and want to dig into that. So velocity. Velocity is the thing that we most often find in Agile teams. So with velocity, we measure the amount of story points, or the amount of tasks, or the amount of stories, or the amount of features. Put this on a line, most often it's per sprint. And then we have an expectation, or we know how much has been planned in terms of story points, tasks, stories, features, and then we measure against that and see if we have delivered. And you see here, for example, that it was quite close. Here, a lot more has been planned than delivered. Well, it kind of keeps going, but it's not as bad as it was before. So this is at least something where you can see where we're going. Now you see already in the title, it says velocity is not the same as productivity. Velocity says just that the team, or if I say I'm part of the team, that we have actually kind of delivered stuff as we planned. Basically, just out, and that has to do with productivity. So more productive is the value we are creating by the client. So it's not about any kind of work components or anything that doesn't have any customer perspectives. So it really has to be usable by the client. So a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, the late three, has once said the primary measure of progress is actually successful customers and not so much the stuff we have delivered. So this is a variation of what you have seen in the Agile Manifesto, maybe. So what we need to look at is, on the one hand, the value, and then on the other hand, how can we look at it, and how can we measure it? And so the one thing that we are doing often in Agile is looking at the average cycle time. So that is about looking at the things that we have the things that are in to do, and how long does it take till they're finally done. So, and how long does it take on average? That is, it sits in to do, and then we start working on it, and therefore it's in progress, and it is to be reviewed, and then at one point it's done. And so coming back to the outcome over output, it means whatever we have to do, we also need to know what is the value of that thing. And therefore also the prioritization of the stories, most often we are working at, should be done based on the value. Therefore, that average cycle time that just tells us from to do to done is looking mainly in the aspects of what's happening during development. Now, unfortunately, this is not where most of the time is wasted. And therefore, what's really more important is that we need to take a look at the value stream. And this is an example value stream that you're seeing here, where you see above the blue line that we are working on something, below the blue, well, which is an arrow line, which says also time. So that could be this one. We say like, what are waiting times? And note, we are not looking at somebody is working on something or somebody is waiting for something. We are looking at the stuff way more from the aspect from the inside of the value we are creating. So is somebody right now working on that value, or is that value sitting around and nobody's working on it because everyone is busy doing other stuff, right? And so this example here, it starts with like, here's a submit request, however you call that. So either you discovered something in the market, or you have a client who calls you up and says like, I really want that, or you have discovered something yourself and you really think that would be helpful if you would have that in the system. So that's kind of a really short point in time. And then what's often happened, or what has happened in this case, so it's really a real case, 4 weeks, nothing happened. Then there was an approval. So some people had been looking at it and said like, oh, this is worthwhile. We really want to look into that and want to probably work on it. And so that was just 1 hour, also a short peak. Then again, 1.5 weeks, nothing happened. Then we look for 2 weeks into what this really means. So I call that here gather requirements, but you can also say like, oh, this is the epic, and what kind of stories are really there? What is the value that's in it? How does it fit to the rest of the product? And therefore that we are also able to prioritize that. Then another 6 weeks, nothing happens. And then we have a customer sign-off. Again, that can be really the customer, or it could be like the product manager, or whoever has an idea about where should the product be heading. But very often it's a customer sign-off saying, okay, from what you are saying, this makes sense to me, and therefore we should do that. And also, well, this is what I pay for it, probably. Okay. You see that we have almost 12 weeks, so almost 3 months going on before we even enter here the to-do part, right? So everything else has just happened before that. And that's the big waste that we are seeing. So that's kind of the biggest problem that's happening. So going back here. Then another big problem that I'm seeing with like metrics and where we are trying to measure what's going on is that we often do not take the perspective of the user, which means we are delivering something, hopefully it's valuable, and so we found out beforehand it has that and that kind of value, and we're delivering it. But hardly at any time are we going back and are asking, is somebody really using that? But because very often we have a really great idea up front, and it's not only us, it's also maybe the client having the great idea, or we figured something else by a competitor or so, and we are providing it. But then we never look back in order to know, is it really used? And that is it really used is another really super important thing to do. And therefore we really need to measure that as well. Because if developed features, stories aren't used, they are waste. And maintaining the waste means it costs us even more. So we really need to think about sustainability here in terms of that the features are sustaining over a long term and long period in time. And actually also, if you think even about the environment, you can think of, well, all that stuff costs also energy, both the energy of the developers, but also the real energy. So looking at what's used. Now, this was all that I had around metrics. I now want to look into increasing effectiveness. And what can we do in order to be more productive, to be more effective, in order to know what's really going on? First of all, I want to share a quote from my colleague, Johanna Rothman. Actually, also, I co-authored a book with, which was on cost of delay. So, or which is. So more effectiveness actually means reducing cost of delay. And Johanna has once provided that great definition that says cost of delay is the way to think about the revenue you can lose plus the cost of continued development. And I would like to dive into this a little bit deeper, because I'm not sure if it's really so clear what we are really talking about here. So one thing is often phrased as limit work in progress. What you see here is in like the lower bottom of the bars, all of those bars, and in red for the ones who shows that in red, we see what's in to do. What is it we need to work on? Then the next stack on the bar, which is in yellow, it is what have we started working on? So everything that's in progress. And then in the top part of the bars, which shows for me in green, is whatever we have done really. So what is it that we have really delivered and is of value to whoever's using the product? But you now see here, that team started off very bad because the biggest chunk is actually the work in progress. And whatever is in progress, actually, you can think of, and I'm going back to Johanna's quote, you can think of it's revenue you can lose because of the cost of development, continued development. So we work on that part, but really nothing, it's not of any usage. So what's really important is that yellow stack, the stack in the middle, gets smaller. And the team managed to do that. However, it's still not really good. Actually, the yellow stack should be more like what you see at the beginning on the first one. So kind of, I don't know, a fourth of what you are seeing, 25% of what's here. Yet. However, they realized that this is a problem, and therefore we really need to work on that. So this is one way you can and you should focus on in order to increase effectiveness, to reduce those costs that you need for continued development. Now, another thing that I see happening quite a lot is multi-projecting that's going on. And I just want to try to explain what you see here on this slide. So it's kind of an easy thing. So we have 3 projects, the dark one, the lighter one, and the white one. And all of them, each one of them is lasting for 2 months. So it takes us 2 months to complete project 1 and another 2 months for completing project 2 and another one for project 3. Now, the thing is, it seems in this case here, what you're seeing here, nobody has really prioritized the way we are working on those projects. So probably it has been said, oh, it's all super important. We need to work on it at the same time in a parallel manner in order to ensure that everything will be finished really early on. That's the picture you're seeing right now, which means only after 6 months, you will get the revenue, or maybe you could also say already after 6 months, you get the revenue of project 1, 2, and 3. Now, if we are starting to prioritize and we actually first concentrate on one of the projects, which would be project 1, then after 2 months, so this would be here, that arrow, we can already have the first possible return on investment. So that's already an early one. And then, of course, if we then would do the project 2 and then project 3, that means after 4 months, we have like the revenue from the 2 projects, and after 6 months, we would have the revenue of all 3 projects. Now, the thing here is probably it will not work out that way, that for all 3, for both approaches, that we really have after 6 months the full revenue. Most often what's happening is that if we are working in parallel, and that's why I have this put here in parentheses, task switching is happening and it slows us down. There is actually research out there that says multitasking costs us about 30% of productivity. So if you want to be more effective and increase the productivity, you should look at stopping multitasking. The thing is also what multitasking means is that, well, nobody really made a decision of priorities, and therefore the person who works on it actually in the end decides, well, or the pair or the team. So we're working on, well, whatever somebody tells us, so what we need to work on, or like who puts the most pressure on us, and therefore we are doing this. Okay, so stopping multitasking makes you way more effective. Then another thing that I want to look into is experts. So experts are often the ones who can finish a task, a story, a feature, whatever we are talking about, much faster than everyone else, because they know the technology, they're well aware of what else is in the system already, and therefore they are way faster than like somebody who doesn't know anything about that. Now, the thing is, what happens quite often with experts is what you're seeing here. So these are all experts, and they all have their stuff they needed to work on, because these are the ones who know the stuff best. Now, something has happened for that person working on this line. So something was more difficult, unexpected things happen, and therefore the list of stuff to do did grow longer and longer. That's why that line goes up so far. And so you can actually question experts, is this really something that's helping? And it does help if all goes well, but typically not everything goes well. Typically things are more difficult than that. And therefore, what's really happening with this picture that you see here, where I question if it's really experts that's helping us here or making us faster, is that in the end, again, we are working on stuff that probably has not prioritized that way we are working on it. For example, it could be that here in that line, we have something, and that the person who works on that line is working on stuff that's prioritized lower than what you see on this long one. Therefore, the way we really need to work on stuff, so we have one, you mentioned also the backlog and all kinds of things. When I asked about Agile metrics, what comes to your mind? Therefore, we should have like one priority list, and the whole team is working from that one priority list, and we are not looking at, well, who's the expert and can do that the fastest? Actually, doing it this way will A, slow us down, and B, it means that we are not working really on prioritized order. We can actually ignore the prioritization altogether if we are working this way. And so this is kind of that way you might know from some shops who work like that. If you are in a shop and there's like one line that ends up at all cashiers, and you are not deciding up front, I will go to this cashier or that one, and then you're standing in the line and you figure out pretty soon, oh, I chose the wrong one. I see already there's a problem. So that should not happen with this way of working. And yes, I do know this is tough because, well, then there will be people working on something, they don't know much about it, they're not experts. And so this is actually an investment we all have to make. And my rule of thumb is always that I say, like, every kind of topic, technology we are working on has to be mastered by 2 to 3 people. So it's always more than one. And also, like, every team member is able to master more than one topic, ideally 3. And this way we can help each other. And of course, helping each other might also mean, well, we are pairing or we are using ensemble programming. So maybe we do it all together anyway. And again, that is the investment we need to make in order to increase our effectiveness. Now, moving on to a different topic, which is quality. Quality is super important because if we will have a lot of technical depth, that means that we will be slowed down if we are adding something new. If we are adding a new feature, then maybe the system will not allow us to do so because it has just too much technical depth, and we first need to be clean up in order to see in order to bring in those new features. Now, this is really important. However, as much as I have seen that missing, really, that there was too much technical depth, but also what you have to keep in mind, this can be also be overdone. So quality doesn't mean perfection necessarily. It doesn't mean gold framing. So it is about reducing the technical depths, ensuring there is no technical depths, but it's not about gold framing. It is about knowing what kind of quality do we need for what and who pays for that. And sometimes we are working on something where maybe the highest quality isn't like the thing that's really needed. Therefore, what we really need to know is what are the customer needs and what are the max investment. So this is related to what we had before. We need to know what value is provided by what kind of story or feature or task, but also what's the customer needs in terms of quality and what's our maximum investment based on this value. And if we continuously overrun that idea of the max investment, that means we are not really creating the value that we promised to create here. Another thing is what I'm seeing in the projects I'm working with or product developments I'm working with is that we often postpone to start. So, and maybe maybe this is a super difficult topic and you are kind of surprised to hear that, but very common concepts that I see in Agile, especially in Scrum, is there's, for example, a sprint 0, which means we are doing stuff, but we are not starting. And most often what I see there is that it is, well, we are hesitant to get started. And a similar concept where I feel like, well, we really should be in that together is the definition of ready. So the definition of ready has the idea that whatever we are working on, let's say a story, is in a state that it's described, understood good enough so that the developers can really work on it and implement that story, which is good. However, the way that I'm seeing often this is implemented in teams is that there is a story that's prioritized for a sprint, and then the team says, well, this is not according to the definition of ready, and therefore it has to get out of the sprint again. And you, for example, product owner, need to work on it and making it ready. And the wrong approach here is that pushing it to a specific role, because the idea of an agile team is really that we are working on the stuff together. And so it's not a single person who is responsible for understanding that story. It's a joint responsibility. And therefore, if we don't know enough about that story, we need to get together and look for all the information that's needed. And it's not about pushing it to somebody else, because that is really more an old way of working. It's kind of a throwing requirements back over the wall to requirements engineers who then have to do that, instead of understanding we are really one team and we have the same goal, which is delivering value in a really effective way. So that's kind of a problem that I see many times, that people are not starting right away, right now, that they keep waiting and they have excuses. And instead of saying, we all need to ensure that this is happening, we just don't get started. Another thing which is super important, again, is taking time to improve. There are various idioms going with that. Like one is, we don't have time to sharpen the saw, we need to saw. A similar thing as with the axe, I also heard that. I also heard that's probably mainly people from Texas who said, we can't build a fence, we have to chase the cattle. So there are various ways of saying that, because we have that in everyday's life. So sometimes the thing is that we are so busy doing stuff that we are not taking the time to reflect and look at what we can improve in order to be more effective. And definitely, I see teams measuring and then also having a retrospective, but then there is no learning really happening because we have that time pressure. On a similar way, we sometimes are aware of technical depth, and we also know that there needs refactoring to be done. However, it's always more important to develop the new stories, the new features, instead of really working on the technical depths in order to move faster. Or another thing could be, we don't have enough automated tests, and creating all those tests takes us too much time. Again, we need to focus on the business value and not on the tests. However, that slows us down in the end. So taking time to improve is really kind of one key element in becoming more effective. And there is just no way around that. So this is really something we all need to do. Now, I've gone over all this, and maybe you wonder what this really means in like bringing the value quickly out of the door to the customer, especially if you use something like, for example, Scrum. Let's take a look at this. So this is the like one of the typical pictures of Scrum, how it works. So you have the backlog, then the sprint backlog, which is created by prioritization. And then we go through those sprints, have our daily meeting, and then there is potentially shippable product increment. I would like to take a look at that. The thing is, Scrum doesn't say that I can, well, it does neither say I'm only delivering, so that would be this, once I've kind of stopped going through that sprint, and neither does it say we are only delivering at the end of a sprint. So the delivery really happens at all times, whenever some value is ready, and it makes sense for the product we are working on, and the client really wants to have that, we can ship that. Because remember the cost of delay, if we are not shipping it, well, then it creates more costs than really revenue. Similarly, and maybe hardly anyone has seen that picture before, if we look at, for example, XP, which is kind of a more chaotic picture, but still it has also that thing. So we have release planning going on, and then we go in our iteration and we work on stuff, and then there's at one point a customer approval and small releases. Somebody also mentioned the releases when I asked about what comes to your mind when you hear Agile metrics. And also here, that doesn't really mean we are only doing it at the end of an iteration. It actually is more continuous integration and continuous delivery, what's happening through the small releases, like really continuous. Whenever we are ready, we can work on that. So it's really in, like, just per example, those two things like XP and Scrum, small releases or potential shippable product increment just means it has passed the acceptance test. We know what kind of value it is providing, and it is providing that value, and it's not really bound to an iteration or a sprint. So this means it's time for me to wrap up and go to the lessons learned. So metrics are actually only reliable in a trustworthy environment. Remember, if there's no trust, it's perceived as control, and then everyone just tries to kind of tweak the metrics, but we are not changing anything in terms of higher productivity or more effectiveness. Then there's just one main thing we really need to measure, and that's value. So we measure the creation and the growth of value. Everything else, it doesn't matter how many stories and tasks and anything we have been working on and shipped. If we don't know what value they are creating, it's waste, it's worthless. And then focus always, and that's the kind of, all of them are what matters really. And focusing on costs of delay, analyze what it is, and eliminating those costs, that really makes you more effective. And in essence, I want to quote Jesper Otterson, who said, you have to release it or no one can use it, and you can't realize any revenue at all. So that's kind of the key thing to everything. And with that, thank you so much, and stay in touch. So this concludes the presentation.
Jutta, we thank you so much for your time and your presentation.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Susan.